You know she's cheating on you? Asked me Shauna, who I would easily call my closest friend in the world. Her steely blue eyes were fixed on my face and gave me no real opportunity to brush off her statement. In the moments that followed her frank statement about ruining my day, I didn't know where to look. We were sitting on the back porch at her house. I sat there not knowing what to say or how to respond. The question she asked me a few minutes ago, not that it came out of nowhere, but it was unexpected and caught me off guard. Until she asked, I had been quietly passing the time. But the question brewing in her gaze also hid a unique form of agony on her beautiful face that only the two of us could understand when she had to say those words. After a few moments of avoiding her gaze, I looked at Shauna and held her gaze briefly, trying to wish that the last 30 seconds could be rewound. I knew Shauna wouldn't challenge me unless she had a reason to. I felt the muscles in my shoulders tense up, and I pulled my gaze away to look up at the cold, gray winter sky. For us natives of the coast of Byron Bay, Australia, this was the coldest time of the year. A chilly breeze blew in from the ocean as the two of us sat on her back patio, dressed in warm sweaters, drinking hot chocolate in the late afternoon. I studiously avoided looking at her and contemplated the clouds. I noted that judging by the movement of the clouds, we were in for a downpour or two in the next few hours, and possibly a good rain. Sighing, I picked up my half-empty mug of hot chocolate, watching the cloud formations move, briefly changing their shapes, occasionally passing a glimpse of blue sky, but then disappearing. I took a deep breath. The sunny sky, like my happiness, now seemed out of reach. No matter how hard I tried, thinking about the weather couldn't distract me from Shauna's unpleasant words. Still holding the mug of warm, sweet flavor, I stopped looking at the clouds and shifted my gaze to Maddie, my 8-year-old daughter, who at that moment was gleefully pushing her half-brother Greg on the swings in Shauna's backyard. The moment stretched for probably a couple minutes. Neither of us said anything else, and I knew Shauna was waiting for me to gather my thoughts. She knew I had suspected something was wrong for a long time. Excuses and sarcastic comments made me think of my wife. The time away from home, the decreasing amount of lovemaking, and even a few angry words that had caused me to sleep in the spare bedroom several times over the past few months had made me sullen and moody to everyone. But everyone knew I was a lover, not a fighter, and avoided confrontation whenever possible. And it wasn't that I was always everyone's doorman. I could stand up for myself and those around me when necessary. But if it was my own personal problem, I tended to put it off and hope it would go away on its own rather than deal with it if it was within my power to do so. I sighed heavily again as I watched Maddie and Greg play and began to feel the emotions I had been denying for months flare up in my chest. The knot of tension I'd been feeling for some time now suddenly made itself known in the form of pain, and I swallowed hard. Looking back at Shauna again, I saw the anguished expression on her face. I know she didn't want to start anything, but at the same time, if there was anyone in this world who had my back, it was her. I shifted my gaze to her again, unable to find the right words, and while I watched, Shauna hesitantly pulled an envelope out of the bag next to her. It was one of those huge bags that mothers all over the world carry around with them to have everything they need for their children. "I'm sorry, hun. I can't think of a kinder way to say this, but Bridget is cheating on you," she told me again. Shauna held the envelope in her hands for a moment. It was the size of an A3 and seemed heavy. I got the look again, a combination of pity and hurt, but she sighed, deciding that was the way to go. She slowly walked over and placed the envelope on the table in front of her, her left hand now resting on it. "It's all here. I've been discussing this in my mind all day, but you should know what's going on. Do you want me to give it to you now or later?" The pain was back in her eyes. She wasn't enjoying this in the slightest, and she must have seen the desperation on my face. What hurt her was that, with the exception of a few months, she had been my closest friend for most of my life and knew me better than anyone else. My name is Timothy Other. Of course, everyone calls me Tim. I thought, until recently deluded myself that I was happily married to Bridget. However, as I looked at the envelope that Shauna had just pulled out, I realized that it contained the truth that my marriage was not so happy and healthy. I analyzed the last few months. Hell, looking back, let's call it the last year. There was nothing I could point a finger at, but I'd always questioned Bridget's fidelity. I sighed expressively, looking at the envelope Shauna held in her hand. Unfortunately, the cheating wife was a scenario that had happened to me before. We sat again, not talking about anything as I stared at the pile of bad news under Shauna's hand. I didn't want it to be true, but the look on Shauna's face told me that whatever was in the envelope was going to hurt. "How's Shauna?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly as I clutched the cup containing a third of the hot chocolate in my fingers, which was cooling quickly. "Rick," she answered quickly and simply. Rick was Shauna's husband, a cool family lawyer who had many connections in Byron Bay and northern New South Wales, as well as Queensland. Rick and I had an interesting relationship. We both loved Shauna and were willing to do anything for her. Despite our history, or rather because of the history between Shauna and I, Rick had also become a good friend of ours over the years. We both continued to stare at the envelope. If what I suspected was true and in the envelope that Shauna had, then Bridget and I were finished, and Rick turned out to be a better friend than I thought. Either that, or he may have finally turned the screws on me for being so friendly with his wife. I stared at the envelope Shauna held in her hand for a few more moments and felt nausea slam into me. I don't think I can go through this again, I thought. Tim, you won't be alone, Shauna said. She always had a good sense of how I felt. But this was about both of us, and I could see that she was holding back the words, this time. Through everything we'd been through, we were both only 25. Getting a second divorce before I turned 30 would be painful. It was giving me a chance to process what was happening. The third time, neither of us said anything until Maddie showed up with 1-year-old Greg in her arms. Mom, I think Greg needs a diaper change. He stinks. She wrinkled her nose, and the smell told us that there was indeed a very ripe diaper wrapped around the baby. My daughter was already 8 and soon to be 18, and she had a habit of talking about everything she did. Shauna stood up, and without saying anything, grabbed her bag, snatching Greg out of Maddie's arms. She threw a brief glance at me, and after a second's hesitation, she took the envelope back, nodding her head at Maddie, and then caught my gaze again. I nodded back. Maddie didn't need to see what was in it. In the next couple of breaths, Maddie quickly moved into my lap and wrapped her arms around me, then kissed me in the air as Shauna carried her son into the room to put on a fresh diaper. "Are you okay, Daddy?" asked Maddie. "I mean, you don't seem okay. What were you and Mom just talking about?" From the look on my face, a thought occurred to her that I just couldn't hide. "You're not fighting again like you did when you were kids, are you?" The thought made my daughter go pale. For as long as she could remember, her mom and I hadn't been a couple, but in her mind, we had always been best friends. But a few years ago, she asked why we weren't together if we loved each other as much as we told her. We did. Shauna and I told Maddie more and more as she grew up, but she was clearly bothered when she heard a few stories that Shauna and I might have been fighting. You see, Shauna and I were once married. We met in our 3rd year of high school, and within a week we were best friends. Friendship led to dating when hormones kicked in, and then, without thinking about the consequences, to teenage pregnancy. Our parents were shocked but supportive. We were young and thought the right thing to do was to get married, which we did right after Maddie was born. Turns out we shouldn't have. Yes, Shauna and I were best friends, but being married to each other wasn't right for our friendship. Admittedly, after Maddie was born and married, the love was there, and outwardly, we were a young couple in love. But a lot of little things accumulated that eventually broke us apart. No matter how hard we tried, we just couldn't be married to each other. One of the things that broke us was that I'm a programmer and a gamer. I started my first business at 16, was married at 18, had a kid, and all the while I was working 80 to 90 hours a week. I gave all my time to Shauna and Maddie, but it wasn't enough for her. Like I said, it was the little things. Most people don't get stressed about kids and work until they are in their 20s and sometimes 30s. Shauna and I didn't have both until we were 18. Although outwardly they were supportive of us, neither of our parents thought we were going to make it work and made us both sign a prenup before we got married. Me because my parents were giving me startup money, Sean because when I failed in my business, they didn't want their daughter involved with it. The business was fine. It didn't fail. But 2 years later, I created a new business and attached the first one to it, creating Other Gaming. Today, even in my early 20s, I have a staff of 50 people in 3 different countries. They are programmers, testers, marketers, and a few administrators. Overall, Other Gaming brings in about $180 million a year through a series of mostly free-to-play games that have microtransactions built in. Microtransactions are what you buy in a game if you want to succeed faster than others. You can buy additional resources, time, or power-ups. Our profits are more modest than some other game companies, but that's no reason to be disgruntled, and we haven't yet had a fiscal quarter that our investors didn't like. Anyway, in those early days, Shauna and I loved our kid. We were best friends, but ultimately the only way I can describe it was that we just weren't in love with each other in the sense that a soulmate is. Like I said, we were broken by little things that you don't pay attention to when you truly love your spouse. If you don't, it drives you crazy. The path to the destruction of our marriage was inevitable. Tied up in business, I wasn't around like I should have been, and as a result, Shauna contributed to our demise much faster. Though perhaps the speed of destruction saved our friendship as well. Things were escalating. We fought each other over household chores, my time at work, and Maddie. As for work, one day I had a late meeting with a couple of my investors, and I forgot to tell Shauna about it. That same day, Shauna didn't tell me she wanted me to come to Maddie's daycare meeting. So when I got home, she was pissed, but I had no idea why. We yelled at each other for almost half an hour, and eventually, Shauna stormed out of the house, telling me to make my own dinner and yelling, "Be a damn! Responsible parent and watch our daughter." She then called her girlfriends, got drunk off her ass, and woke up the next morning in the bed of some random guy who picked her up at the bar they were at. To Shauna's credit, she never lied to me or tried to hide her act through tears and regret. She came home the next day, upset and remorseful. But as a young guy, when she told me about her act, my whole world crumbled around me as my best friend and wife humiliated me. Without hesitation, I lashed out at her with words, calling her a whore and a slut. Shauna recoiled for a moment and then responded, venom in her voice. She called me a pathetic bore and a loser father who had never been there for her or our daughter. As soon as the insults flew off her lips, she realized it was a mistake. She was the one who left and slept with someone else. We both knew I didn't mean what I said, but her reaction and implied anger was like an arrow to the heart. Regardless, I had been her best friend for as long as we could remember, and she knew it. "Tim, she tried to say, clasping her hands to her mouth in horror. I looked at her mournfully, raised my hand, and then just turned and walked away. I immediately moved into the spare bedroom. For the next few months, I'm sure our screams could be heard in the next neighborhood. Of course, I was hurt, and I filed for divorce for adultery, citing the prenuptial agreement. After being served at home while I was at work, Shauna didn't go the usual counseling route. Over the next few weeks, she alternately repented, apologized, and when I didn't tell her I forgave her, got upset and yelled at me, calling me weak, pathetic in bed, and the worst mistake of her life whenever we were in a room for more than 30 seconds, and then burst into tears. The only time we didn't fight was with Maddie, but even then things were tense. In the end, it was the intervention of our parents who were like, "We told you so." That helped us. They called a truce, bringing us back to ourselves. I came home one evening when all 4 of us were in the living room. Shauna was crying and upset, and both of our mothers were talking to her in raised tones. After both fathers took me aside and told me off a bit, even though they realized I was the offended party, the 6 of us intervened in the situation. They laid it out straight and made us both feel guilty. For 3 hours they berated us, each in turn. When they then left us alone to talk, Neither Shauna nor I said anything for 15 minutes, but as soon as we started talking, everything went away, including the hurt and pain. Even when she cheated on me, which hurt both of us, it was the first time we talked without yelling at each other. I believed her when she explained that she would never have done it if she hadn't been drunk and furious. "I'm so sorry, Tim," Shauna told me, wiping tears from her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you like that. I shouldn't have left that night. I shouldn't have." "Don't ever do what I did," she said, taking a deep breath. "I disrespected you. I was stupid, and even worse when I took my anger out on myself at you for cheating on you." I smiled sadly. "And I'm sorry, Shauna. It hurt, and it still does. You're my closest friend. I had to forgive you." Shauna reached out and touched my cheek sadly. "Thanks, Tim. But what does that get us?" she asked. We talked for a few more hours. We agreed that if we stayed friends and rebuilt trust in each other, we couldn't be married anymore. For the first time in months, she cried in my arms. We never made love or slept in the same bed again, though. Over the next few days, we spent a lot of time together. We decided that raising our children together as friends, rather than as husband and wife, was the right way to go. The divorce went away over the next 18 months, and gradually Shauna and I became best friends again. We decided to bury the bitterness, and in the ashes of our marriage, we found that we had become as close as before, if not closer, gradually opening up to each other, trusting each other as we had when we first started dating. We hugged and even kissed chastely on occasion, but our romantic love disappeared with the divorce. I was sad, yes. I still loved Shauna with all my heart, but I'd rather have her as my friend and in my life, and we both destroyed each other by being married and unable to trust. Bridget and I started dating a little less than a year after the divorce, a week after Maddie's 4th birthday. Bridget was working with Shauna at the time, which is how we met. Bridget had been hinting at a date for months, once it became clear that Shauna and I had broken up. When I didn't ask her out, she took the initiative to ask me out herself. I asked Shauna if she was okay with me going out with Bridget. She hesitantly gave me her consent, but I could see that she was hurt that I was dating her. After the first few dates, I would often catch Shauna on my doorstep with Maddie the next day, and inevitably tell her about the time Bridget and I spent together. She was a true friend and never outwardly judged me in those early days. She was completely supportive of me, even when there were tears in the corners of her eyes. 3 months after my first date with Bridget, she got me into bed and rocked my world. In bed, however, Bridget showed me reality. About 6 months after we started dating, Bridget opened up and told me that around the same time that Shauna and I were going through our divorce, she was breaking off a long-term relationship that she called intense but unhealthy. Because Bridget and I had met several times when Shauna and I were together, she saw me as someone kind and loving who would care for her, not use and abuse her like her ex-boyfriend did. In terms of physique, Bridget was short but trim. When this was over, Bridget moved in with me, and I think things got even better. She was fun to spend time with, always laughing or asking how my day was going. She loved to go out, but also didn't mind when I wanted to stay home and snuggle in bed. After about a year of being together, Bridget started hinting at marriage. This time, it didn't take me long to propose. 8 months later, we were married. We could have done it sooner. However, she was trying to convince me to drop the prenup that was a prerequisite to our marriage. My legal team was demanding protection, and the chairman of the board flew in from Sydney to sit down with Bridget and me and explain why the prenup would happen, or our marriage would not happen. We almost broke up over it after a few heated conversations, but in the end, after the board chairman left, she signed the documents. Other gaming was on the rise and was getting worldwide attention for a few of my new games, so my corporate lawyers and board of directors got what they wanted. While Bridget and I were getting ready to get married, Shauna had also met Rick, and as much as I wanted to hate him, I couldn't. Rick was friendly, a couple years older than Shauna and me. When I saw them together, I noted that he was a good match for her, complimenting her in a way I never could. It was almost the exact opposite of how Bridget and I had started dating. Rick and Shauna were indecisive, and their intimacy took time. Bridget and I started with lust. When Shauna pointed this out to me, we had several serious conversations in which we agreed to discuss our jealousy of our partners so that we would never go back to not being in each other's lives. As Bridget and I and Rick and Shauna became a couple, everyone knew not to let that get in the way of Shauna and I being girlfriends. For example, in the early days of Rick and Shauna's life, we almost fought over a few things. Well, that's not true. He smacked me on the lips once when he caught Shauna hugging me after I dropped Maddie off. They were engaged by then, Bridget and I were married, and Shauna had told him to get over his jealousy since I was already married, was her best friend, and Maddie's father. If he couldn't deal with that, he could pack his bags and hit the road. 6 months later, I was best man at their wedding. All in all, it was a bit surreal how our relationship turned out. It had always been clear that Shauna and I were in each other's pocket, and with Maddie coming along, that was never going to change. Once Rick came to terms with that, we became close friends and confidants once he realized I wasn't a threat to his relationship. Eventually, the two of us started spending a lot of time on the golf course, and Rick realized that I loved his wife, but not like she did. At the same time, there was an easy friendship between Bridget and Shauna. They couldn't be called best friends, but they spent time together from time to time while Rick and I played golf or took Maddie for a walk. Back to the present, I tilted my head and kissed the cheek of my restless daughter, who stole a chocolate chip from a cupcake I hadn't actually eaten, on the plate in front of me. "No, honey," I said to Maddie, trying to figure out how to properly talk to an 8-year-old about her dad's wife, but not about her mom cheating on him. "Mom and I aren't fighting. She's just talking to me about something that I think is going to be difficult," I finished, trying to find the right words. "It's Bridget, isn't it?" Maddie said defiantly. I stared at her. She snorted like a teenage girl who thinks she knows everything in the world. She looked at my face and uttered, "I thought so." "Maddie," I frowned. "You have to respect Bridget. I realize she's not your mom, but you like Rick and he's not your dad," I told my daughter. She snorted again, now picking at her muffin, which I was clearly ignoring. "Yeah, but Rick respects your and Mom's relationship, and he adores Mom. Bridget doesn't like Mom or me, and she doesn't respect you." I sat there, a little dumbfounded. I don't know how I hadn't noticed that. Bridget and I had been together for 4 years and married for almost 3. Combined with what I knew was in the envelope Shauna was going to show me and my 8-year-old daughter's comments, a lot of things just fell into place. Little things that I had overlooked when talking about how Bridget acted or treated me, Shauna and Maddie. Taking a quick look at everything from the outside, I saw how little disrespect I had allowed since the disaster of our marriage to Shauna. I wanted things to work out, so I had been more passive and condescending than I should have been, and Bridget probably knew it. We sat in silence for a few minutes, Maddie continuing to eat my muffin, until Shauna brought Greg in with a fresh diaper. Shauna looked at me and asked Maddie to take Greg to play, while Shauna and I continued to talk. Maddie started to protest, but Shauna overpowered her with her mommy voice. You can never argue with a mom's voice. We both looked after our daughter as she walked back into the backyard with Greg. She's almost got it all figured out, Tim. Maddie is almost too smart and sees things she shouldn't at her age, Shauna said as we watched her walk away with her brother. It was my turn to snort as we watched the step-siblings settle down in the sandbox, and Maddie started digging a hole that Greg thought was fun to push sand into. She must be getting it from you. I miss all that, don't you? I said sadly. I looked at the woman I had loved for so many years, and still love today. In many ways, though I hadn't yet seen the contents of the envelope, I felt despair. Moments later, Shauna was in the chair next to me, her arms suddenly wrapped around me, comforting me, and we both let the tears flow. If I was honest with myself, I knew that Bridget hadn't loved me the way she used to for a long time. I knew there were too many things that just didn't add up. I saw an envelope sticking out of Shauna's bag, so I released myself from her embrace and pulled it out, then sat down next to Shauna. I opened the envelope, and then Shauna reached out and put her hand over mine. Tim, she said, making me look at her. Nothing in there is going to make you feel anything but pain. Okay? She'd obviously already looked inside, and I nodded. I swallowed and, finding nothing else to do, opened the envelope, out of which fell 2 documents and a USB drive. The first document was a summary report of the times, dates, and locations where Bridget was being followed, as well as transcripts of conversations that were recorded on the USB drive. On the thumb drive was a combination of audio and video recordings that left no doubt that everything I read was true. I sighed bitterly as I returned the documents and USB key to the envelope, feeling bereft of many emotions, but I knew it would hit me hard later. Why? I asked, feeling something inside me die. Shauna didn't answer anything. I think she sensed some agony in my question. Tim, she started, but then stopped. I turned to look at my oldest friend, the mother of my daughter, my ex-wife, and my first betrayer. What's wrong with me? I asked, heaving my chest heavily. Shauna looked shocked by my question. Am I so pathetic that the women I love are forced to cheat on me? As soon as I said those words, I regretted them. Shauna reacted quickly. She kissed my cheek and then immediately put her arms around my neck and started crying, while I just sat there feeling betrayed. A moment later, she looked up at me. Tim, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I stopped her. No, it's me, Shauna, I replied in desperation. I shouldn't have said that. It's unfair, and I'm sorry I compared it to us back then. Will you forgive me? I asked. She pulled away and gave me a weak smile before kissing my forehead. Of course. Well, what do we have here? Came another voice. Looks awfully cozy, said that voice. Turning to face the newcomer, we saw that Rick was trying to look serious, but he wasn't succeeding, a smile playing across his face. He saw the envelope in my hands, and his smile went from teasing to sad. Oh, he said, making no move to separate Shauna and I. Instead, he walked over and sat down in the chair on the other side of me and put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. Sorry, buddy. I kind of took it upon myself. Shauna and Maddie said something that got me thinking, and a couple months ago, I set some wheels in motion. This private investigator I've used a few times. I just got the report yesterday, he said quietly, genuine concern reflected on his face. Have you looked at it yet? I asked Rick, and he shook his head. No, I haven't. I only looked at it from the private investigator's side when we brought it in. He looked at his wife. But from your reaction, I'm assuming you both have? We both nodded. Rick exhaled and leaned back in his chair. So, what's next? Asked Rick. I shrugged. Divorce. The 3 of us didn't say anything but looked back at the sandbox. Little Greg was lying in the hole Maddie had dug, and my daughter was filling her in while Greg laughed. Every now and then she would glance in our direction, but then turn her attention back to Greg. She knew it was adult conversation time. Despite the serious nature of the conversation, all 3 of us were smiling. Babe, Shauna asked Rick, is it appropriate for you to, she stammered. To introduce Tim? He asked, finishing the question. Shauna nodded. Yes, I can do that. Tim, would you mind? Rick asked me seriously, in lawyer mode. I nodded. Yes. I handed the envelope to Rick. You'll need this. He held it back out. It's your copy. I assumed you would pick one out yourself, and I have one of these sitting on my desk in my office. A prenuptial agreement? He asked. I grabbed my phone from my desk, quickly found the document, and sent an email with the prenup signed by me and Bridget to my new family lawyer. I laughed. I was sending the information to my ex-wife's husband. Shauna looked at me cheerfully. What's that for? To my divorce lawyer who is about to spew my cheating wife, I said, as Rick smiled his lawyerly smile that looked like the smile of a big white fish about to devour a meal. Married to my ex-wife, who? Technically, I said in quotes, I divorced for cheating on me and forcing a prenup on me. For a moment, no one said anything, and I wondered if I'd put my foot too far in my mouth. But after a moment, Shauna hugged me with a laugh. Rick clapped me on the back. At least you still have your sense of humor, Rick said mockingly. We spent the next half hour discussing my next steps. Bridget will be spending a week with her mother on the Gold Coast. She'll be gone for at least another 5 nights, I said as we made plans. The look Rick gave me, and then Shauna's look as she glanced over to her husband spoke volumes. Bridget probably hadn't visited her mother. Okay, I said quietly. Well, I suppose I deserve it, but it'll give me a little time to get my affairs in order. Knowing my wife wasn't with her mother added a little more pain to the mix, sprinkled on the shit sandwich, so to speak. We talked for a few minutes, and Maddie brought Greg back to the table as the sun was already setting. Half an hour later, after many hugs from my daughter, I was heading home in my Arctic White 2016 Mach 1 Mustang. My Mustang was my first new car purchase, which was a reward for reaching $5 million in revenue. The board of directors gave me a budget and was surprised when I spent less than half of it on the Mustang. I drove home and parked. The big security gate closed on the driveway as I pulled into the garage. The house was owned by a subsidiary of Other Gaming and was rented to me as an executive privilege. At the time, it was a way to get a large modern home, the house Bridget wanted. I, on the other hand, just needed a nice office for my computer supplies and a bed to sleep in. Nevertheless, the house was nice. 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, and a deck overlooking the ocean in the distance. One of the bedrooms was my computer and game room. Maddie had her own bedroom decorated with the taste of an 8-year-old girl, and of course Bridget and I had a large bedroom overlooking the ocean in the distance. We only lived in the house for 6 months, but in that time we managed to throw a few parties and christen almost every room in the house, as a young married couple should. I wondered if she'd ever brought Brad here. The thought made me uncomfortable. I walked into the kitchen, dropping my bag and the envelope with Bridget and Brad's information on the kitchen bench. I immediately headed to the pantry, from where I returned with a bottle of Bundy rum and then retrieved a cold can of Coke from the refrigerator. Pouring myself a double shot, I grabbed the envelope, pulled out my laptop, and set it up to view the contents on a USB drive while I read the report in more detail. The report revealed that Bridget and Brad had been together before she and I started dating, but had broken up a few months before. When I calmed down and read the report, it matched what I knew about Bridget's breakup. We didn't talk about it often, and the private investigator confirmed what I knew. The breakup between them was unhealthy when it first happened. I further read that they had not communicated for about 6 months prior to our wedding, and less than 3 months after our honeymoon, my loving wife resumed a relationship with her former partner. The private investigator's report had page after page of transcripts of conversations, detailed conversations ranging from their daily life together when they were together to recollections of their history and future plans. In other words, a full-blown romantic relationship. Sitting down, I read several of their conversations in great detail, almost aching with the realization of the level of betrayal from my loving wife. But what really got me was the section of the report that captured a conversation between the two of them after they had finished partying at Brad's apartment just a month ago. I found a video file on a USB drive that matched the transcript, and plugging it into my laptop, pressed play. "But Bridget, baby," Brad said tearfully, "why don't you ditch that loser and come back to me? You're in my bed almost as often as you're in his. You know I rock your world a lot better." Bridget laughed. "Brad, honey, he has 2 things you don't." "And what's that?" he asked hesitantly. "Brains and money," Bridget replied simply. Brad snorted. "It's true, honey," Bridget lectured. "Tim has lots of money, and I can use it while I'm his wife. And Tim is smart, too. He's always been successful, his company is worth a lot, and he's still on his way up. That's why when that bitch Shauna dumped him, I took a chance. She had no idea how much he'd be worth." Brad snorted again. "Then why don't you just divorce him and we can both use the money you get?" "Brad, You've got muscles in all the wrong places. Tim's lawyer made me sign a prenup. If I leave him before 10 years of marriage, I get very little. Even after 10 years, if I leave him, I'll only get a fraction of what he's worth. Worst of all, we have to be careful. If Tim ever catches us, I'll be left with only the clothes on my back for the next few years, Bridget explained to Brad without much emotion. But this way, we both benefit. I get money to take us to different places, and we get to have fun on a regular basis. But you're still sleeping with him, Brad whined again. That's because I'm his wife, said Bridget to her lover with irritation. Look, Brad, honey, if I don't sleep with him, if I don't give the appearance of being a good wife, then all of this, she gestured around the house, will come to an end. Tim doesn't know it, but this place belongs to him. You don't want to lose a place you're not paying anything for, do you? I guess not, Brad groaned unhappily. But I don't like you sleeping with him if you don't love him. Bridget laughed again. Oh, my poor, poor baby. I do think of Tim fondly, but he's just a tool to get what I want. Her smirk turned wild. The camera only captured part of her face, but a chill ran down my spine as I watched her and she spoke the next words. I'll tell you what, babe. Tim and I have been talking about having kids soon. What if when I stop taking the pill and we can pass it off as Tim's? Does that make you feel better? Then when the baby turns 18 and can inherit Tim's money, you can tell Tim that the baby is yours and not his before some accident takes it away. Brad cheered at that. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. I didn't sleep well that night, watching the video of that exchange while I read the report and a few others like it. I tossed and turned, and dreams of Bridget and Brad kept spinning in my head one after another. I managed to doze off, but around 8:30 I was suddenly awakened by my phone ringing, and I hesitated for a moment to take the call. Hello? Sleepily I said. I heard a giggle. Well, hello, big guy. Are you sleeping at home while I'm gone? Said my wife's voice cheerfully. For a moment I hesitated, not knowing how to react. Should I come clean with her or play it down? Bridget caught my pause. Tim, are you okay? She asked. I couldn't tell if the concern was feigned or real. Now I decided it was feigned. I decided to downplay what I knew. I didn't need to see her, so I swallowed my feelings after all. Everything would be out in the open soon. Sorry, late night. I'm working on some complicated issues right now, I replied. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry to hear that. Well, I'll be back Monday night, and you can tell me all about it, and then maybe we can start working on that baby we talked about, my traitorous wife said with a cheerful disposition, confirming that she wanted to let Brad knock her up this weekend. Sure, I replied without enthusiasm. Tim? I heard a note of question in her voice, wondering if she thought I suspected something. Are you sure you're okay? I sighed. Yes, Bridget. Your call woke me up and I didn't sleep well. I'm just a little out of it, I replied, trying to sound normal. She stammered, shit. All right, babe. I'll be sure to bring you something good to eat with Goldie, okay? Sounds good, Bridget. Have fun, I replied, trying to sound like a loving husband should. I heard Bridget exhale. She must have bought it. Okay, my husband. We'll talk later. Love you. Goodbye, I said, and hung up before anything else could be said. The comment about trying to have a baby hit me, and I spent the next few hours wondering what the hell she was doing trying to get Brad pregnant and then passing him off as her own. After her last period a few weeks ago, she threw away her pills with a song and dance, telling me it was time. I was pissed. I spent the rest of the day doing the usual things one usually does in the midst of betrayal. I went online and removed Bridget's access to my bank accounts, canceled our joint credit cards, called my accountant and corporate lawyer, asking them to remove her from my insurance and will. I wrote several letters introducing Rick to my corporate team to tie everything together. The net was going to be closing in on Bridget very quickly, and the thought made me smile unhealthily. Around lunchtime, Rick and Shauna showed up at my place with food. Hot chicken, fresh bread, hot chips, and some salad. Maddie. Took Greg to her room and they played while Shauna made lunch and Rick and I talked. Thanks for the letter of recommendation, Rick said to me and frowned, looking me over. But I have to say, you don't look like you slept well last night, bud. I shook my head. No, not really. I hardly slept at all, and when I did, the dreams. Rick nodded his head. So when do you want to push the button? Isn't Monday too early? And I explained what I wanted to do. Rick smiled. No, we can do it, Rick replied. But I'll have to leave my family with you and go to the office for a few hours to get everything set up. Do you mind paying a little extra for that? I'm giving you the family rate, but my boss will still want me to charge for weekend work. I brushed off the remark. Not a problem. I want it done quickly. I spent a few hours on the private investigator's report and the video. What I read and watched last night made me sick to my stomach. She's having fun with that asshole Brad this weekend to try to get pregnant and then plans to pass the baby off as mine and then have an accident with me when the kid turns 18. Rick's eyes widened. Obviously, he still hadn't seen the details. Even Shauna, who was sitting with a plate of sandwiches, looked upset. Are you sure? She asked. Yeah, she's off the pill, and I watched a video of her convincing Brad that this is exactly what's supposed to happen. I slumped my shoulders. Don't worry about it, Tim. We'll make sure she doesn't come back here. Rick said, I'll also draw up a restraining order against both of them to be filed Monday morning. And I'll stay here with the kids and help you pack Bridget's things, Shauna said. I ate lunch and the food made my stomach feel a little better. So when Rick left, I went to the spare room and grabbed a handful of boxes that we hadn't gotten around to throwing away since we moved in 6 months ago and carried them into the bedroom. Over the next few hours, Shauna and I boxed up most of her clothes, toiletries, and hygiene products. I put about a third of her jewelry, what she had before the wedding, in the bag. I kept the rest. I put a few of her shoes in the boxes, but most of those were left behind too. I had no idea what I was going to do with them. Maybe the homeless shelter? As the day went on, I made a few phone calls to get things sorted out. Rick called me 3 times about some details. The last 2 times he was much more somber, and I realized that he had started working on the private investigator's evidence. For some reason I wasn't surprised, but for some reason I was disappointed that I hadn't heard a peep from Bridget. When Rick returned early in the morning with Thai takeout, his mood was stormy and he hugged me, telling me how sorry he felt for me. At that moment I realized he was a real friend, not just my best friend's husband. I held out a note to him with a 6-digit code. What's this? He asked, looking at the note. Your new code for the front gate, I said. I rebooted the system, giving everyone a new code, and Bridget removed it. Great, Rick said. And we talked for a few more minutes, after which he bowed out, kissed Shauna, and went off to find his son, while Shauna and I got busy making dinner. Dinner was modest, and they ended up staying the night and most of Sunday, and headed home right after dinner. I spent quite a few hours with Rick talking about the divorce process. When Shauna and I broke up, there was nothing to share, as the other game was just beginning. However, after becoming successful, I always took care of Shauna and Maddie, far exceeding the required alimony. When it came to Bridget, the betrayal was deep and deliberate. I wasn't going to do much for her. There was so much more at stake this time, and I wasn't going to let Bridget get any of it. I was sure Bridget would blow the score, and Shauna had pointed that out when we'd discussed things on Sunday morning. I don't think she ever loved you, Tim, Shauna said, setting aside the private investigator's report. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner, and to be honest, I've never liked Bridget, but I couldn't stop at anything. I may be best friends, but given our history... I nodded. I was hoping you'd be okay. I know you loved her and let her get her way, but you let her act the way she wanted, Shauna said quietly, looking me straight in the eye. I'm not submissive, I whispered defensively. Shauna laughed. No, you're not, and that's not what I meant. I meant that you don't mind if people lead you to the next step. I've noticed that if you don't want to do that, you just go on your way. Bridget tried to take advantage of that. Sooner or later, the house of cards would have collapsed, and I'm glad it happened before the pregnancy. We talked some more, and a few minutes later, Maddie came back into the house, holding Greg's hands over his head as he waddled away, grinning like toddlers do when they get everyone's attention. We entertained the kids for the next 15 minutes before Rick went into the living room and got the kids to watch a movie. Maddie kept picking up on that, Shauna remarked as they left the room. She never liked Bridget, and no one messes with her dad. That's what I'm telling you for sure. Except her mom, I said jokingly, earning a punch on the arm. Tim, Shauna said, and the emotions in the room suddenly changed. I looked at my ex-wife and saw a sad expression on her face. She sighed. I know we've talked about this before, but I'm sorry it didn't work out, Shauna told me. But I hope you know that doesn't mean I love you any less. I nodded my head, suddenly finding it hard to swallow. Shauna continued. You're my best friend, Timothy Other. We made a beautiful little girl together. We went through hell and nearly lost each other. But you showed me true character by not burning me when you had the chance. But Shauna, I started to say, but she interrupted me. No, Tim, you didn't burn, she told me. Yes, we yelled and screamed at each other. I did things I'm terribly ashamed of, and yes, I called you a lot of names when we were in the middle of our divorce. But you never once treated me badly. You never once gave me any reason to think you weren't just an honorable man. Rick came back and sat down next to Shauna, put his arm around his wife and nodded as he heard the end of her words. Shauna told me a lot of what you both went through back then. Rick sat back down, a little deep in thought. Tim, as a lawyer, I can count on the fingers of one hand the number of people I trust in this world, and you are one of them. When Shauna told me to get my head out of my ass after our little run-in, I saw you in a whole different light. You never intended to steal my girlfriend. You just wanted to have a best friend and raise your daughter. As soon as I saw that, I knew something had changed for me. You were an honest, decent man who just wanted to do the right thing. Rick looked at me. Tim, I heard your comment earlier. You are by no means submissive. I've seen you argue with Shauna over things I wouldn't dare argue with her over. Shauna smiled at her husband's comment and then nodded at me. I've heard stories of you tearing your subordinates apart because they did something you told them not to. You're an alpha male, but the difference is that you play by your own rules, not someone else's. Most alphas are governed by FOMO, but you are not. Author's note: FOMO stands for fear of missing out. Make your point, babe, Shauna said. You're in lawyer mode. Rick and I giggled. Rick said, looking at Shauna. Tim, you're going to go through a lot of shit getting rid of Bridget, but you need to know that nothing is your fault. You were an attentive husband, and she took advantage of that. It will be her loss, not yours. We calmed down a bit after that, and Shauna offered Maddie to stay with me this week to keep me company. After thinking about it for a bit, I declined in case my relationship with Bridget went sour. I didn't want Maddie to be in the line of fire. Monday morning, I went into the office to work with a few managers on a few different projects. We were planning on releasing a new game in the next 6 months that would combine augmented reality with multiple platforms. This would be great if my personal life didn't get in the way. I got home in the early evening and began nervously pacing around, waiting for the confrontation to begin. A little after 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Tim, baby, my code isn't working on the gate, Bridget said in a super sweet voice. I can't get into the house. I know, I said simply and emphatically. What do you mean you know? She said with a slight concern in her voice. I took a deep breath. I know everything, Bridget. I know about Brad. I know about your plan to get pregnant and pass it off as mine and the accident you planned. I know you're off work every Tuesday and Thursday. I know you live with Brad in the apartment you made me pay for. I know about your disrespect for me, and above all, I know you don't love me. She was silent, mulling over my words. I didn't wait for her to respond. I know your code doesn't work, Bridget, because I've revoked your access to my home. You don't live here anymore, I finished. But Tim, how can you say that? I love you, baby. Bridget's words were sickeningly sweet, but there was fear in them. Don't forget I'm the one who picked you up when that bitch Shauna left you. I'm the one who carried you to bed and loved you for all those 4 years. How can you say such nasty things to me? Easy, I spat out into her phone, letting my anger at her betrayal show for the first time. I stood and stared out the window at her standing alone at the gate. That's when I noticed the cars pulling up. Turn around, Bridget. She turned around, and I heard her gasp. I heard 2 short conversations echoing through the phone in Bridget's hand. Mrs. Bridget Other? A man asked. Yes, Bridget answered, her voice trembling. You've been served, the guy said. It didn't have to be that way in Australia, but I wanted a statement. The guy continued. In the envelope is a divorce petition, a prenuptial agreement between you and your husband, and a notice for you and one Mr. Brad Houghton to vacate the apartment belonging to your husband within 10 days. My client notes that any resistance will result in any financial offer he is willing to negotiate, other than the prenuptial agreement, being canceled, and he will sue you for mental cruelty. The last document is the restraining order, which has been drawn up and goes into effect tonight. With those words, he got back in his car and drove off. He was worth the money I paid Rick. Bridget's next conversation was with an elderly woman who got out of her car. Marion, her mother. Mom, Tim, she began, but stopped when her mother's slap sounded over the phone line. Slut, Marion said. I know enough about what you did to that poor man. I've never been so disappointed in anyone in my life. Mom, I don't know what Tim told you, but it's not true, Bridget protested, holding her cheek. For a moment, I thought the older woman was about to slap her daughter again. But the mother-in-law turned and walked back to her car, opening the door. Drop it, Bridget, Marion told her daughter. Tim shared one of the pictures he has with me, and I know the truth. You have nowhere to go, and Tim asked that your father and I take you in. I can't believe you got involved with that Brad guy again. He's an absolute loser compared to Tim, her mother muttered. I was still listening on the open line. Tim was kind enough to move all your stuff over to our place. If I were him, I would have burned them. Get in, concluded Bridget's mother, ignoring her daughter's protests. Just then, Bridget realized that our call was still connected and brought the phone to her ear again. Tim? My soon-to-be ex-wife said uncertainly. Bridget? Said I, devoid of emotion. There's no fixing that now, is there? She said with a mixture of despair and hope in her voice. I laughed half seriously. Not a chance in the world. Follow the instructions in the divorce document and everything will be fine. I'm willing to be fair above and beyond the prenup, but it's worth it for me to make a little joke, and I'll make sure you're left with nothing, including your respect. I paused, and we were both silent for a moment. I did love you, Bridget, I told her quietly. But you threw that love away because you don't love me? You're a gold digger. Oh, and Bridget, I said, preparing to fire a parting shot across the bow. I didn't hear anything, but I realized she was holding her breath. Take a pregnancy test. If you're pregnant, we both know it's not my baby. And if you are, and you try to dispute my paternity, I'll grind you so dirty your grandchildren will still feel dirty, I finished harshly. As I hung up the phone, I heard her sobbing. I have to admit I felt better, empty, but better. The next month was like a roller coaster emotionally. I'd burrow into work or take Maddie for walks to distract myself. But when I slept, the dreams weren't pleasant, and I woke up several times swearing like a sailor. Bridget hired a lawyer and communicated with Rick. Rick believed they were going to challenge the prenup and demand a traditional 50-50 division of property. However, nothing had happened yet. I allowed Rick to put $30,000 on the table as a settlement, but so far they hadn't said anything. That weekend, however, things changed. I took Maddie to the beach with me, and we ate ice cream together, sitting on the sidewalk outside one of those little fish and chip shops from the 80s. You've probably seen them on TV, old beige brick buildings with tin roofs. The floors are linoleum, and you can smell the chip oil in the air as soon as you walk through the door. There are plastic, Tables and chairs out front, the atmosphere is casual. Everyone is walking around in shorts or bikinis, with towels over their shoulders or a surfboard under their arm. Maddie and I came for a swim. We both liked the waves. We swam, rinsed off in the freshwater outdoor shower, and then sat like father and daughter on pale blue and yellow plastic chairs and ate ice cream. The weather was chilly after winter, but one thing about Byron Bay is that if it's sunny outside, the water is nice, even if it's a little chilly. Maddie and I were enjoying ourselves, discussing how to catch a wave that was just getting high, when suddenly a huge arm went around my neck and I was dragged backwards off the chair, and Maddie started screaming. A few moments later, I was flung to the floor, gasping for breath and almost avoiding the blow that knocked the spirit out of me again. Goddamn Dewib! Throw me out of my seat and I'll show you! I felt the disgusting sensation of saliva on my face as I looked up to see Brad Houghton standing over me. Maddie's face reflected the panic of being attacked. Thankfully, after a moment he backed away, pushing me to my feet. Common doofus. You couldn't satisfy Bridget, he taunted as I stood. He looked at Maddie for a second and smiled a sick smile. I bet this one isn't even yours, you damn loser. He then started to step toward me, grinning. You got me kicked out of the house. You just couldn't maintain the status quo. I was willing to let Bridget continue to entertain you. All you had to do was stick to the damn line. I tried to dodge his punch, but having no experience in fighting, I caught his punch in my left shoulder. I was spun around and fell into the garden bed. I felt Brad take a step forward, but before he could reach me, my daughter lunged at Brad, screaming at the top of her lungs. Leave my father alone. He hasn't done anything to you. Get away from him. She took a deep breath and screamed. Help the police! Help the police! I was later told that I lost consciousness for about 30 seconds, and when I came to, there was a small crowd of people around. My arm was clamped around Maddie. Brad was nowhere to be seen. Someone in the crowd told me that they had called emergency 000, and the police and ambulance were on their way. Fighting the pain in my back and arm, I slowly sat up and asked for my phone and keys, which were on the table in front of me. The elderly man looked at me sadly. Sorry, son, but that guy after you caught your girl here. He stood still for about 10 seconds, then turned around, grabbed your phone and keys, and ran off. I swallowed and nodded, feeling the pain in my side, my arm throbbing, and even though someone had handed me a towel pressed to my head, my temples hurt too. Could you get my daughter's bag? I asked the man. He looked at the younger man and nodded. A minute later, a man about my age came back with Maddie's bag. I reached into the bag and pulled out Maddie's cell phone. I had gotten her an iPhone for her birthday this year. It was locked, but she could call me or Shauna anytime. I dialed Shauna's number. She picked up on the third ring. Hi, beautiful. Did you have a good swim with Daddy? She said cheerfully. Shauna, said I, wrinkled my nose as another stab of pain shot through my back. Tim? I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stir when Shauna recognized that I was hurt and using Maddie's phone. We're hurt, Shauna. Maddie is with me now and is being very brave, I said. Maddie looked at me, her eyes reddening and a mask of discomfort on her face. The howling of sirens could be heard in the distance, which was quickly getting louder. I don't have much time and we're both in a lot of pain. The police and ambulance are on their way. But I need you to call Nadine and have her trace my phone. Time is of the essence. Nadine was my assistant. What's wrong, Tim? Is Maddie okay? I could hear the pain in her voice, the pain a mother feels for her child when she is helpless. She's here with me now, and she's acting like the bravest girl I've ever met. I smiled through my daughter's own pain, who was crying again, but trying not to make any noise. It was Brad Houghton. He attacked me and then tried to throw Maddie out of the way when she got between us when I fell. We both got hurt. Can you get to the hospital? I don't know if they'll let us stay together. I need you by Maddie's side. On my way. I could already see Shauna pulling the car out of the driveway as her Bluetooth picked up the call. Mommy's on her way to meet us at the hospital, honey, I told my daughter. I tried not to move either of us as we sat there. Maddie nodded and wrinkled her nose again. An ambulance pulled up, and two paramedics got out. One ran straight to us, and the other went and got a gurney out of the trunk. "Tim, are you okay?" said Shauna over the phone. "I don't know, Shauna. My focus is on Maddie right now. The ambulance is here. I'll see you at the hospital soon." "I'm sorry, but I have to go. Please call Nadine and ask her to follow up. Brad has my phone and keys. He probably stole my car." "Okay, Tim. I'm on it. Keep an eye on our girl, please." "I will," I said, and hung up. Over the next 5 minutes, the ambulance crew examined Maddie. They brought in a gurney and then started examining me. Hopefully, they would be able to load us both into the same ambulance. They assumed my daughter had a broken arm and praised me for getting in the way in time. If she had hit the pine barrier without me, she would have been much worse. They moved Maddie onto a gurney and helped me to sit on the edge of the ambulance. My arm was broken too, and they were sure that at least 3 of my ribs were broken too. They examined my head and suspected I might have a concussion, as myself and witnesses described the altercation. The police arrived, and I had time to give the first few details while they loaded us into the ambulance. They took Maddie and me to the emergency room of the local hospital. Once we were in the emergency room, we were both seen by doctors in the same bay. Maddie wouldn't let go of me. About 15 minutes after we arrived, Shauna was wheeled into the ward, and I breathed a sigh of relief as she went straight to Maddie and then gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. A few minutes after that, the doctor took x-rays on both of us. It turned out that Maddie had a small fracture in her right arm. They gave her an anesthetic meant for children and got busy bandaging the limb. I was in much worse shape. I had a confirmed concussion as evidenced by an approaching migraine-level headache and waves of nausea and fatigue crashing over me every few minutes. X-rays confirmed that I had 5 broken ribs and an arm. In addition, I would have severe bruising on my back from the collision with the barrier in a few days. I was given some strong painkillers and had special clips applied to the wound on my forehead. Afterward, I lay in the hospital bed, looking at Maddie and smiling. For her, I would endure 1,000 times worse, just to keep her safe. Shauna looked at me and, as always, knew what I was thinking. "Thank you," she said with tears in her eyes. "You know I'd give my life for both of you," I replied, trying to lean back and get comfortable. I closed my eyes, and after a moment I felt a kiss, and when I opened my eyes I found Shauna standing over me with tears in her eyes. "I love you too, Tim," she said, and I smiled. Suddenly I shuddered, and then I started coughing up blood. Shauna screamed, and I felt myself losing consciousness and a new pain building up in my side. That was the last thing I remembered for 3 days. When I woke up, I was in a much nicer hospital room. Rick was next to me, and he heard me stirring. "Hey, buddy, how are you feeling?" he asked, looking me over anxiously. "Shitty, what happened? Is Maddie okay?" I asked. Rick smiled. "She's fine. She's got her cast on, and she'll be back at school next week. She's going to be the most popular girl in school after her heroic father." I tried to laugh and felt the sharp pain in my side again. Rick noticed my grimace. "Here, the nurse told me that if it hurts when you wake up, that's the button to administer morphine. Only use it when you need it. If you can tolerate it, then don't use it." I tried to smirk but couldn't. "What's wrong?" Rick tried to smile too, but then he looked miserable. "It's nothing. The doctors told us that one of your ribs bent too much as a result of a fracture and nicked one of your lungs. You had to have a minor surgery, but you'll be fine." A minute later, a nurse entered the room, followed by a doctor, and Rick sidestepped so as not to be in the way. They examined me, informed me that I was fine, adjusted my medication, and then left Rick and myself to talk. "Any news on what happened to that asshole, Brad?" I asked. Rick smiled as he sat down on the edge of my bed and pulled out his phone. "This is from the night you and Maddie were brought in." It was a clip from a news program in Sydney. Our top story today. The manhunt for Bradley Houghton is underway. Earlier today, Mr. Houghton attacked local Byron Bay businessman Timothy Friend. We're heading to Byron Bay Hospital, where Mr. Friend and his daughter are currently being treated. Carly is with you. Thank you, Sharon, said one of our local reporters, with the entrance to our hospital behind her. I had met Carly Ivans twice before when she interviewed me for the other game. Around 11 o'clock this morning, Mr. Other was attacked by the now wanted Mr. Bradley Houghton. Witnesses say that Mr. Houghton grabbed Mr. Other by the head and dragged him backwards, attacking him without provocation. Carly, news anchor Sharon asked, can you tell us about Mr. Other's condition? Yes, Sharon, Carly reported. Mr. Other is in serious but stable condition after emergency surgery this afternoon. What else can you tell us? Asked Sharon, sitting at the news desk. Sharon, Carly began, the police note that Mr. Houghton stole Mr. Friend's phone and car and was last seen heading south towards Newcastle just after the altercation. It is unknown at this time if Mr. Houghton is armed, but police say he is potentially dangerous. If he is spotted, call Crime Stoppers immediately and do not approach him. Good advice, Carly. Sharon paused briefly, reading the note lying in front of her. Carly, can you tell us anything about why Mr. Houghton might have attacked Mr. Other? Carly hesitated for a moment, looking for someone behind the screen. She must have gotten a nod as she looked at the sheet of paper in front of her. Yes, Sharon, there are some details about what caused the incident. Apparently, Mr. Houghton was recently evicted from an apartment that Mr. Other didn't know about. The reason is that Mr. Other's wife of 2 years, Mrs. Bridget Other, had been in a long-term affair with Mr. Houghton, which Mr. Other had recently learned about. Mrs. Other now lives apart from Mr. Other and is assisting the police in their investigation to find Mr. Houghton. Byron Bay is currently looking for one of its most successful businessmen. Mr. Timothy Other brings in over $70 million a year to the local economy, and his company, Other Gaming, recognized for some of the most innovative games available on the internet today, brings in more than double that amount to the Australian economy. We can only hope he makes a full recovery. We all hope so, Carly, Sharon replied in her anchor voice. Keep us posted on developments. She turned to the camera again. Next, we have the state premier, once again in a scandal that has voters demanding his resignation. Rick paused the clip, grinning widely. Brad was picked up in Wollongong yesterday after he ran a red light on your car when he was spotted by the local police. He lowered his smile. Unfortunately, he wrote your car off, but they caught the bastard. Don't worry about the car, I waved him off. I'm just glad he got caught and Maddie's safe. We talked for another 15 minutes until we were interrupted by Maddie running into the room following Shauna, who was carrying Greg. How are you feeling, Daddy? Asked Maddie, climbing onto my bed with a look of absolute concern on her face. I'm feeling much better, Princess. The doctors have treated me very well, and so have you. I replied. Maddie looked at the cast on my arm, then at her own and smiled. My doctor, Mr. Sweeney, said I was very brave. Maddie smiled and then got serious again. But I told him it was my daddy who was brave because you saved me. I smiled back. Thank you, beautiful. I'm sorry it ruined our day. But once we feel better, we can try again. There are still waves out there with our names on them. This brought a smile to my daughter's face, and we spent the next few hours talking about days at the beach and eating as much ice cream as possible in one day. Eventually, Rick took the kids for a walk and left Shauna with me. You really scared us out there for a while, she said as she held my hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I replied. I know, I'm just glad you're safe. Me too, I replied. We talked some more, and then Nadine and a few of my team from the office came in, bringing cards and chocolates. When Rick and the kids came back, a few of the chocolates were probably gone, judging by the look on Greg's face. I spent a little over a week in the hospital before they sent me home. The police questioned me and then proceeded to arrest Bridget. Apparently, she was marked as an accessory, Brad. Explained in the interrogation, without a lawyer, to the idiot that Bridget had expressed a desire to see me beaten up for kicking her out and evicting Brad. He just happened to run into me and Maddie that day, and as Bridget's words rang in his ears, he decided to take matters into his own hands. The court case was pretty open and shut, with Brad being convicted on multiple charges of assault, theft, and destruction of property. He was sentenced to 15 years in a medium security penal colony with parole after 12 years. Bridget was found guilty of accessory to assault and sentenced to 5 years, but received probation. Although, if she had been convicted of another crime, nothing more than a speeding ticket, she would have had to serve the full sentence. The judge also granted us an immediate divorce, stating that I didn't deserve to be chained to a woman as stroppy as my now second ex-wife. I surprised everyone by pledging to give Bridget $10,000 to help her get a fresh start in life. True, with the stipulation that she do it somewhere other than Byron Bay. While I was recovering, Nadine worked with me at the house every day, and Shauna was usually there too. If you think that Nadine and I became a couple, you are mistaken. First, Nadine was my executive assistant. As the saying goes, don't litter where you eat. Second, Nadine was married and almost 60 years old, not the right combination for a young guy who had just turned 30. As we worked, I came up with a new campaign after seeing Maddie one afternoon in her now heavily signed cast as she was coming home from school. She was staying with me almost full-time at this point, as Shauna was always here, which made sense, but Maddie was now very protective of me. One afternoon, after seeing Maddie play, I decided that we would run a promotion on 3 of our most popular games. For every pack bought for $10, we would give $1 to charities around the world. At first, my finance department was upset. After expenses, that dollar represented just over 30% of our profit. However, within the first month, they were thrilled to see revenues growing. Marketing got involved, and Carly Evans did a chart study, and our in-game purchases increased by over 300%. We ended up donating almost $500,000 to 3 different charities in Australia, Poland, and South America. Now every year we run a charity campaign, giving money to those in need. As the months went by, Maddie and I recovered, and when the cast came off and my ribs healed, it was the middle of summer, and Maddie and I were back at the beach. Now we were always followed by Shauna and Greg, and Rick when he could. Greg was now walking on his own, and Shauna enjoyed splashing with him in the shallow water while Maddie and I played in the surf. I had a great time that summer. Of course I was a little lonely. I missed having someone around, and although Shauna was always there for me, even she realized that I needed a romantic companion. Over the summer, Shauna and I started talking about the fact that it was time for me to get back into dating, but my heart just didn't lie to it. The few dates I'd had gone badly. Either there was no spark, or they were intimidated by my background, or worse, they were just outright gold diggers like Bridget. I wished I could find someone like Shauna with whom I could have that kind of connection. Hell, I was only 31 years old, and I still had plenty of time to spare. It had been a year. I'd had a couple small interactions with Bridget, but they had been short and very abrupt, and most of the time it ended with me saying no. She either wanted money, or a renewed relationship, or worse, she wanted me to forgive her. Each time I would give her a negative answer and hang up. What I didn't know was that my life would change again, but not in the way I thought it would. I had just turned 32, and the office, along with Shauna and Nadine, had planned a birthday party at my house. I had stayed in the house after my divorce because it was a really beautiful house, and I had invested a lot of money in it, so I planned to enjoy it. We had over 100 people gathered that night, and I know probably a little less than half of them. People from work were there, a few local business people I worked with, even Carly Evans was there but was told she had to be off the record. My family was there, my parents, Bob and Tina, as well as Shauna's parents and a few of Rick's relatives. Everyone was eating, drinking, music was playing, and as the evening went on, I felt a nice buzz from everyone handing me a fresh drink. I had just seen Maddie run past, laughing with one of my cousins. Kids, when I accidentally bumped into someone and muttered an apology. "And that's all you have to say? Apologize?" came a voice. I turned around to the not quite shrill voice. "I beg your pardon?" I asked the woman standing in front of me. "You heard me," she said. "A simple apology is just rude. You could have knocked me into the pool." Despite the aggressive tone of her voice and the scowl on her face that seemed at odds with the world, the woman in front of me was as strikingly beautiful as she was repulsive. She was quite tall. I believed her to be 6 feet and me to be 6'2". She was quite slender, but with curves that were very noticeable in the floral jumpsuit she was wearing. She had pale skin with a scattering of freckles on her nose that emphasized her sapphire blue eyes. But what really caught my eye was her red hair. Long, braided almost to her waist, it was a crimson color, like a smoldering fire you could stare at all night until the embers burned hot and you couldn't say anything, feeling its heat. But at the same time, it repulsed me. It wasn't lit, but the woman had a cigarette in her hand and was clearly heading away from the group to smoke. In my opinion, you can take the most beautiful woman in the world, with whom every man, woman, and child on this planet agrees, the perfect human specimen, stick a cigarette in her hand, and I recoil. That's exactly what happened to me as soon as I saw the smoke in her hands. "Hey, dumbass," the woman said, bringing me back to the fact that she was talking to me. "Stop staring at me and tell me where I can go to hide from the crowd." You can't." I finally replied, "There are no smoking areas here, and if you want to smoke that cancer stick, you need to go outside." She snorted. "Is the guy who owns this place really that arrogant?" There was a contemptuous note in her voice that said she thought it was wrong that she wasn't allowed to smoke. "Yes," I replied, taking a step toward the woman. She looked toward the fence on the other side of the pool where no one was. "I'm sure he won't mind if I smoke where no one is. How about over there?" I looked at the corner she was talking about and shook my head. "No, ma'am. I don't think that's a wise idea. You can't smoke in here and there are kids around." She looked a little angry, but at the same time, at the mention of children, she started to put her cigarette away. At that moment, Maddie walked up with her friend and little Greg in tow. "Daddy said you can't smoke, lady. That means no smoking," declared Maddie authoritatively. "Is this man your father?" The woman looked at me questioningly. "Uh-huh," Maddie said, putting her hands on her hips. The woman took a small step back as Maddie, her friend, and now Greg all put their hands on their hips in a defiant gesture. "And everyone does what my dad says. If he says don't smoke, then don't smoke," Maddie said, with a note of sass in her voice. I thought I should intervene before Maddie went on a rampage. Even after all this time, she still lashed out at anyone she thought was lashing out at me. About a year ago, Shauna and I got her to start seeing a therapist. She had a few fights over me. It turned out that thanks to Brad that day, my daughter now wanted to protect me from everyone, believing I might die if I was hurt again. I took a step forward to turn to face the 3 kids, but at that moment Greg thought I was stepping forward to deal with the woman in front of us. He was already 3 years old, but along with his older sister, he was learning to push and was quite noisy. When I turned around, he stepped forward and pushed the woman slightly. We didn't think about the fact that we were all standing at the edge of the pool, and during our brief encounter, the woman stepped on the edge of the pool, balancing on her 3-inch heels. And Greg's slight nudge caused her to lose her balance and was about to fall. I saw it happen and reached out to support her, but it was too late. Her eyes widened with an expression of utter horror, and she clutched at my arm, pulling us both into the pool with a loud splash. I was no stranger to pool banter, and since it was my birthday, I expected to be thrown in there at some point. But whoever this woman was, she didn't. I surfaced laughing, while she surfaced spluttering and screaming like a banshee. "How dare you, you little!" And then she saw little Greg and stopped. You can't get mad at a 3-year-old boy. Instead, she looked at me, laughing, and the frown on her face deepened. "And you? How can you laugh? That's no reason to laugh," she scolded me. "Of course it's funny," I replied, holding back a laugh. "We fell in the pool, classic slapstick, what's not to laugh at? If you don't laugh, you'll cry, so get over it, Karen." "Karen?" She looked at me. "Who the hell?" She paused, looking at the kids who were giggling along with a few other people around them. "Who the hell is Karen?" she said, and the cigarette she had wanted to smoke earlier floated to the surface between us. The tiny bubble of air that formed on the surface and burst a moment later made me grin. I stared at her, almost turning the water in the pool into vapor, and couldn't resist another tease. I'm sorry. I don't know your name, but given your violent temper, your demand for a smoking area, and the look that says you want to talk to the manager, I thought you might be Karen. I watched her face start to turn bright red, and for a moment I thought I may have gone too far. I hesitated for a moment, seeing the pool sink an inch as the water evaporated to contain the heat the infuriated woman was radiating. For your information, mister, I'm not Karen, and I just needed a place to smoke out of the way so I wouldn't disturb anyone. She stopped, looking at me angrily and realizing what I had just said. I smiled. I'm not Karen, she repeated. My name is... Lily, yelled Rick, approaching with Shauna and a pile of towels. I knew you'd be nothing but trouble. Rick almost frowned as the woman I now knew as Lily, unfortunately not Karen, and I swam to the edge of the pool. Now that the spectacle of people falling into the pool, including the birthday boy, was over. Most of the guests went back to their conversations as they continued to laugh. Watching us climb out of the pool, Shauna giggled when she saw that I was the one in the water. Well, you got in a little earlier than I thought, but you did. Happy birthday, water boy, Shauna said playfully. I climbed out of the pool and grabbed a towel. I dried my hair and turned to Shauna, doing my best impression of Blue Steel. Merman. 2 small coughs. Merman, I said, slinging the towel over my shoulder and walking away like a male model. Shauna doubled over with laughter. I caught the words, black lung. And water is the essence of phlegm, as she continued to laugh, and I quickly turned around, struck a pose, and yelled, Watch me turn left. As I continued walking, I heard several people laughing. Maddie and Greg, seeing their mother laughing, joined in. Rick was smiling and holding out a towel to Lily. Who is this, Rick? Lily asked, wiping her hair with the towel. I could still read the frown on her face as I stopped several times to chat with the guests and laugh. He was the most smug, arrogant asshole here. He wouldn't let me smoke, damn it. Now it's all soaked. That dear cousin was our host, the birthday boy, Tim the other. Rick replied, holding Lily's bag as she wrapped herself in a towel. You mean, asked Lily, looking at me with widened eyes. I was acting out my fall into the pool with a few guests, caught Lily's gaze and smiled. Uh-huh, Rick said, smirking. Lily groaned. Not again. I heard Rick laugh as I opened the door and headed inside to change. The rest of the evening went great. The pool incident was laughed about, although little Greg was told off for pushing. I also talked to Maddie about not prying when she didn't know the whole story, and later in the evening I saw her walk up to Lily and apologize. Shauna took Lily to the bedroom that Rick and her used when they were visiting. Lily took a shower and Shauna gave her a change of clothes. They didn't really fit, but as long as Lily's clothes were in the dryer, they would do. Later that evening, I was saying goodbye to Nadine, her husband, and a few of my staff when I saw Lily sitting with Rick and Shauna. The kids were now in the living room watching a movie, and there were only a few people sitting in groups while the restaurant staff cleaned up. I poured myself another Bundy and Coke and made my way over to Lily, Shauna, and Rick. So, Karen, I said, settling into the seat next to her, do you cater parties like this one, or just special occasions like birthdays? I didn't, Car. She paused, checked herself, and smiled. Only birthdays of arrogant men who make their kids push me into the pool. I laughed. It's not mine, it's theirs, I said, pointing to Shauna and Rick. Confusion was reflected on her face. But I thought they were yours. Maddie, the girl who came to defend my honor, is too. And here's little Greg. He belongs to Shauna and Rick. Oh, Lily said, lowering her gaze to her hands for a moment. So you and Shauna, came the question. Yes, Lily, Shauna said. Tim and I were once married, and Maddie is our daughter. A flash of anger flashed across her face, but was just as quickly replaced by deep sadness. She looked at Shauna. How can you, Since he's your ex and he's like that himself, how can you be in the same room? There was a pleading tone in her voice, as if there was some pain inside her that she didn't know how to express. For a moment, no one said anything. I think we all realized that this had turned from a casual sit-down into something very serious, and very quickly, "Guys, let me take this one," Rick said, looking at Shauna, then at me. We both nodded. "I think Lily needs to hear it from the outside first." "Let me explain. Lily is my third cousin. She comes from Kingscliff. She has—" Rick paused, thinking about how to explain. "She's had a rough time the last few years, and the family thought it would be good for her to get away for a while. She arrived this afternoon, and I asked her to meet us here so she could meet a few people before spending the next 2 weeks with us. Unfortunately, she didn't get to meet Shona or the kids before they arrived, hence the confusion." I smiled. That explained a lot. But there was something else. Something that hadn't been said yet. "Lily," Rick continued in an almost parental, notational tone, "I think it's safe to say that Tim and Shauna are best friends. I learned not to be jealous of them years ago, and I trust them both with my life." He smiled lovingly at his wife, then looked at me, and I raised my glass in gratitude. He sighed. "I can't imagine how two people who were once married managed to remain friends. But before you think it, they have Maddie, and not once have either of them given me reason to doubt that they're more than just friends." Lily's jaw dropped, and she looked between Shauna and me. Shauna giggled. "It's a little weird and not exactly normal, I know. Most exes hate each other. But Tim and I were friends before we got married, and yeah, things fell apart. But he's always been there for Maddie and me. I love him dearly, but it's more like a very close brother. We now know we shouldn't have gotten married. But right after my husband—" Shauna looked at Rick for a moment with loving eyes. "There isn't a person in this world I trust more than Tim." I just sat back and sipped my drink. I laughed a little at the woman and guessed there was more to her story that I didn't know. But getting involved now wasn't the right thing to do. Something occurred to Lily, and she looked at me for a few moments. "There was that case Rick was involved in on the news a couple years ago. That was you, wasn't it?" I raised my glass, taking a quick sip and contemplating how to respond. Most people, when they realize what happened, are either flabbergasted or pry the information out of me, wanting to be my best friend. I looked at Lily, choosing my words. "Yes, it was me. So Maddie is very protective of me. We both got hurt during the incident, me very much so when I rescued her. Now every time Maddie feels someone attacking me, she jumps up and thinks she has to protect me. She gets over the fact that I got hurt saving her. Her brother is only 3 years old, and he thought he was in solidarity with his sister when he pushed you. It just went too far. I'm sorry." Lily didn't say anything, but looked at me strangely for a while before nodding. "Look," I said, "if you really want to smoke in the corner, you're welcome to. With so many people here at the time, I just didn't want people to see it or the kids," I finished as I took another sip of my drink. Lily stared at me again. It's a shame she's so dismissive of the world and also smokes. Otherwise, she could be quite attractive. That would be nice. She paused, tilted her head to the side, then shook her head sadly and sighed. "No, it's okay. I know it's a bad habit I picked up again recently after." She paused. A tear suddenly appeared in her eyes. She glanced briefly at Rick, then stood up and walked towards the corner. I looked at Rick and he shook his head gently. "That's a story for another time," he said. When Lily came back to the table, we saw that she had been crying. We were just discussing the Star Wars series, The Mandalorian. Rick and Shauna weren't fans like me, but they had watched several shows with me over the years, and following the exploits of the Mando was one of them. I tried to convince Rick that in the future, Mando would have to fight several other Mandalorians for the Darksaber. But Rick didn't see it that way. "That's the way it has to be," Lily said, surprising us. And it was reflected on our faces. And I saw the first smile on her face and realized that there was beauty lurking beneath the guise of a woman, ready to sizzle the whole world at a moment's notice. And not for the first time I wondered what had hurt this woman so badly. "I already told you," I replied. using a line from another character that many of my friends used in response. I watched as Lily tried her best not to smile, but she failed miserably as both Rick and Shauna laughed. Lily blushed, but they smiled and I even thought she relaxed. Star Wars fan? I asked the slightly unhinged woman. More of a science fiction fan, Lily admitted. I didn't even need to look to see Shauna's intense stare. I just ignored it. Around midnight, the last of the guests dispersed, leaving the four of us and the kids passed out in lounge chairs inside the hotel. Since we'd all had more than a couple drinks each, I put Shauna and Rick in their usual room with little Greg. Maddie, of course, took her room, and Lily took the guest room. That night, as I fell asleep, I remembered seeing a beautiful woman in a white jumpsuit emerge from the pool, leaving nothing to the imagination. Too bad she smoked. We spent the next few days at my house. Shauna, Rick, and by extension, Lily hung out together. We went to the beach, swimming in the surf, building sand castles, and eating fish and chips. Mostly if you forget about the fact that she wanted to smoke. Lily was a nice person. So what's your story, Lily? I asked late one night as we watched Shauna with Maddie and Rick and Greg in the pool. We'd all had a couple drinks and I blabbed. Lily stared at me. It's none of your goddamn business, the fiery redhead threw back at me. I raised my hands in a sign of surrender. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend. I just thought I'd ask because, well, even though you keep saying you need a smoke, you never smoke. You seem to be on something, I explained. You know a little about my past, so you know I've been there. And more than once? Lily looked at me critically and angrily, then sighed. I mean, she tried to begin. Take your time. We have all afternoon and I think they're all too busy to notice us, said I to the woman beside me. She took a deep breath, deciding something. I lost the baby, Lily said sadly. I didn't know what to say, and that admission surprised me somewhat. Lily cast a brief glance at me, then turned back to the glass of red wine she was slowly drinking. It was about 6 months ago, she began, moving on to explain her memories. I was with my boyfriend for a little over 6 months, and I don't know exactly why, but I got pregnant even though we were using protection. When she looked at me, I didn't say anything, but nodded in acknowledgement. I was a little worried at first, since we were both so young in our relationship. But less than a week later, I was happy with the idea. My boyfriend Aaron, he was less, she mused. Anyway, we fought and yelled at each other, and as soon as I started showing myself, Aaron started coming home later and drunk. Lily took a deep breath, her eyes becoming moist. One night, he came home really drunk, and I told him he had to start being responsible, because he was going to be a father. She looked at me again, and I tried not to move, not wanting to do anything to stop her from telling her story. We argued and yelled at each other for almost 2 hours. He was drunk and I was furious. I needed him to stay sober and help me while our baby grows. Lily paused for a moment, gathering her composure. That part I only told 2 people, Lily said very quietly. One was the policeman who questioned me, and the other was the surgeon who took care of me later. I don't know why, but I'll trust you, Mr. Other. I nodded in acknowledgement. We didn't know it at the time, but our neighbors called the police. A domestic disturbance was reported on our scream. We both heard the sirens, and in his drunken state he thought I was the one who called them and pushed me to the ground. And then... Lily couldn't. I reached across the table and placed my hand on her arm. She smiled strainedly, the pain of the memory clearly read on her face. I'm sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry, I said sympathetically, trying to hold back the sobs. Thank you, she replied, and sighed again. I lost the baby about 2 days later. I had to have surgery or I could have been in danger. I'd like to think she was a little girl like your Maddie, that she would have been full of life and just beautiful. She pulled a tissue out of her bag and wiped her eyes, then surprisingly handed me a fresh one. I took the tissue and found that my eyes were wet as well. Lily continued as we sat down. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Shauna was looking at us, but she had distracted Rick and the kids. Anyway, Lily began again. After losing the baby, I became severely depressed and was prescribed antidepressants as well as several hormone medications, most of which I've now finished. But as you've probably noticed, every now and then I can be a little cocky. I laughed, and Lily joined in, which didn't offend her, but told me that light mirth was to be well received. And let me guess, you started smoking after a few years? Just as a coping mechanism? I asked, trying to be lighthearted. Lily smiled and nodded. My girlfriends and I used to smoke at university. I know it's a dirty habit, but it's how I get my mind off things, she said, as if she had finished her story. Lily, do you mind if I give you a hug? I asked. She suddenly stared at me. I feigned innocence. Please don't take this the wrong way, but I guess neither the police nor the surgeon who knows the whole story would be able to hug you. Lily stood up and walked around the table, and when I approached her, held out her arms like Maddie does when she wants to comfort her parents. I put my arms around her and pulled her to me. At first, she was as still as a board, but after a few moments she relaxed and suddenly clung to me so tightly that the walls of the dam collapsed. Lily sobbed on my chest, wailing loudly. I looked back at the pool and saw Shauna and Rick watching what was happening. Rick in particular was frowning. I shook my head slightly, and Shauna grabbed Rick's hand, drawing them away to play with the kids and distract them. I took Lily to the break room, away from the others. We sat down and Lily continued to sob, never once looking up, all the while resting her head on my chest and her arms wrapped around my hands. I wasn't sure what to do, so I didn't say anything, but held her in my arms like I would hold my daughter if she was distraught. After about 10 minutes, Shauna and Rick pulled the kids out of the pool and took them into the house. I smiled as they tried to walk quietly past us. Shauna gave me a questioning look again, and I mumbled the word wipes to her. A few minutes later, Shauna returned with a box of tissues and a pitcher of water with 2 glasses, set them down, and headed back into the house. This activity must have thrown Lily off balance because she looked at the pool, then at me, then at the napkins and water. Her eyes were puffy, and the mascara she had used earlier had dripped badly. I took a tissue and wiped away her tears, then poured a small glass of water and handed it to her. Here, I said. She silently sipped the water and then settled back into my arms. Are you okay? I asked. Lily shook her head, then looked up at me and nodded. Yeah, thanks. I didn't realize I needed it. I smiled. It's okay. When I divorced Bridget, Shauna did something similar. I probably had worse makeup than you. Lily laughed, looking at the napkin in her hands. It's really special to you. Shauna, I mean, asked Lily. She's my best friend, and always has been. Shauna and I have been through hell and back together, and any time I really needed her, she was there for me, I replied. Even during your divorce? Asked Lily, and I sensed she was trying to find balance by asking about my relationship. I nodded. Even then. Sure, there was a lot of yelling, and even though we got Maddie in the bargain, we shouldn't have gotten married. But in the middle of it all, I realized that I was better off with her than without her. Just not to marry her. What about your second wife, Bridget? Asked Lily. I sighed. I hate to admit it, but I married Bridget out of calculation. It wasn't the smartest move, and if I had looked at things sensibly, I would never have done it. Bridget had been cheating on me for quite some time. I loved her, or thought it was love, but all the evidence I gathered showed that she never loved me. I was just a meal ticket. Lily looked up at me. I'm sorry to hear that, Tim. Despite the impression of a first-class bitch I gave you when we first met, you turned out to be a lovely person. Bridget was an idiot. Any girl would be lucky to have you. I raised an eyebrow. Any girl? I interjected. Lily nodded. Yeah, if only I could be like that. Before she could finish the sentence, I had already gotten to the point. I covered her lips with mine and kissed her. Her eyes widened for a moment, then closed, and I felt that hurt, angry, but beautiful woman pouring into me again. True, this time it wasn't comfort, but attraction. When we pulled away, we both smiled at each other, and Lily took my hand. That was unexpected, she said, smiling at me. I frowned. She noticed. But not unwelcome, she corrected quickly. That's right, I said, repeating my previous comment. Lily chuckled. For the next hour, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, Lily and I talked. We both delved into the pain of our past loves. She told me that her ex was now in jail on numerous charges, including assault and DUI. The night she was assaulted by him, he had gotten behind the wheel nearly 3 times over the legal limit. Jail was a good place for him. By the time the sun had set and the lights came on, Shauna and the kids were out of the house, followed by Rick with a pizza from Mom's grocery. Fresh and hot, with homemade Italian sauce, fresh mozzarella and basil on a traditional pizza crust, cooked in a real wood-fired oven. The conversation was a little tense for a few minutes, but Lily deftly explained to Shauna and Rick that we were discussing some grudges from our past. She didn't go into detail, but she told just enough to appease Shauna's inquisitiveness. I knew Shauna would question me later. After dinner, we all went home. Maddie was with me this week, and Shauna and Rick took Greg and Lily to their place. Our hug with Lily was awkward, but there was a note of affection that neither Shauna nor Rick missed. As Maddie and I were getting ready for bed, Maddie let me know she didn't miss me either. Daddy, my daughter began, in a tone that suggested she wanted to talk to me about something serious. I sat down on the edge of her bed while she brushed her hair. You like her, don't you? My perceptive daughter inquired. I think I do, Maddie. She's been through a lot. In some ways, even more than we have. But we've only known her for a couple days. Let's give her time. We don't want another Bridget on our hands. Maddie snorted. I don't think Lily is like that bitch. I frowned upon hearing her words, Maddie remarked. Sorry, Dad. I meant that undeserving woman. I laughed. Maddie was growing up fast. In a few more years, boys would be in high demand, and then watch out world. It's okay, Maddie. Bridget was a bitch. Maddie and I smiled at each other. But just watch your words, please. And Lily, who knows? But what do you think? Maddie chewed on her lower lip for a second as she continued to run the brush through her dark blonde hair. You're right, Dad. She's not like Bridget, and Mom and I were watching you two this afternoon. Oh, you were watching, were you? I asked, smirking, and Maddie blushed. She likes you, Daddy. A lot, if Mommy and I are right. Just rest assured, Dad. I don't get that weird feeling I got from Bridget, but she's damaged too. We can all see it. She is. She's had to deal with a lot over the last few years, and none of it is her fault, I told my daughter. Like what? Asked Maddie. I can't tell you, Pumpkin. Lily told me in confidence, and I won't betray her. I thought Maddie was going to argue with me, but she only nodded curtly. After that, we moved on to school and homework, the way parents usually do when pushing their kids to get them ready for the school week. Later, I was sitting in my office, going through emails and planning my week when Shauna called. I don't know what you said or did, but that woman is just fascinated by you, Shauna said, feeling like I was being told off. Hi to you too, I laughed, switching to my Bluetooth headset and calling up the schedule for our program sprints for the next month. While Shauna spoke, I started moving tasks around the board, preparing them for review by our development teams next week. I'm serious, Tim, Shauna said to me in a conspiratorial tone. Lily did nothing but talk about how great you are all the way home and right up until the moment I called you. Rick told me he'd never seen her so devoted. Apparently, her old boyfriend was abusive and it didn't end well. It didn't end, I confirmed quietly. A pause hung on the other end of the line, and I could hear Shauna mentally going through the gears. She told you everything, didn't she? She asked me. Yes, she did, I confirmed. Shauna, Maddie already asked me about it, and I'll tell you the same thing I told her. That woman has been through so much that our problems seem small and insignificant in comparison. But she also told me about it in confidence, and even though you're my best friend and I love you, I can't say anything more than that. Shauna fell silent again, and I continued to stare at the sprinting boards in front of me. So you like her too? She said simply after a moment. I stopped looking at the boards and turned to face my office window. It was dark outside and not much could be seen. Although container ships could be seen passing by in the distance, their signal lights could be seen as they swayed gently back and forth. Yeah, I like her. She's articulate, witty, loves science fiction, doesn't mind that I'm a geek, I began. Shauna laughed. And don't forget she's gorgeous to death, Shauna finished. And I hadn't noticed, I said, trying not to give away the humor. We both laughed for a minute, teasing each other. Seriously, Tim, Shauna reasoned as we got back to serious conversation. She likes you for little more than a passing flirtation. In between talking about you, she often asks me about our relationship as well as Maddie. She's a little worried about you and me. I laughed. She shouldn't if there really is something there, and between talking to Lily this afternoon, Maddie earlier and now with you, I'm starting to hope there will be life after Bridget. Tim, there will be, Shauna said seriously. You don't mind if I speak on your behalf. After all, I'm your first love and best friend. I have unique knowledge that can either sell or scare you? I felt Shauna arched an eyebrow. I thought for a moment, Lily was everything we had talked about before and more. In front of me was a beautiful woman who was worried that everyone in the world was out to get her. Loyalty had never been an issue, but love. Of course, Shauna, I replied. I'm not sure this is going anywhere, but come on. I didn't hear from Lily or Shauna for 3 days after that. Maddie was suspiciously quiet, and during dinner, she cast glances at me like something was going on. I, on the other hand, just burrowed into my work and let the geek take over. It was Wednesday night. I had just gotten back from the office and found Maddie, Shauna, and Lily sitting in my living room. Shauna and Lily had each had a glass of wine, and the smell of something similar to carbonara was coming from the kitchen, that distinctive and delightful aroma of white sauce and bacon. I greeted the ladies and excused myself for a few minutes to go to my office and make a work plan for the evening once Maddie went to bed. I wasn't sure how things would work out with Lily, so I decided to keep a low profile. Tim, Lily said as she entered my office. Dinner will be on, she stammered, looking around the room. Her eyes widened and she looked at the computer setup, an impressive multi-screen device. But if you don't know about computer equipment, it's the usual stuff you'd expect from a geek like me. What caught her attention, however, were the posters and frames on the wall. For almost 2 minutes, Lily walked over and looked at the posters and awards on the wall next to them. It was impressive that I had a picture for each of the successful games, and next to it was a frame for each of the awards she had won. It was a reminder of everything I had created at Other Gaming, and I must admit I felt a certain pride seeing it. In my office, the awards hung in a frame on the wall, but here, in my private space, I loved seeing the games I had created. I know this game, Lily said, pointing to one of the posters. I ended up spending a few $100s to buy the bonus packs. It was a good game. She then looked at another poster. This one too. I spent a few hours to level up. She then looked at another game, pulled out her phone, and showed me that she had this game. This game got me through that time in the hospital. I liked puzzles. When it was completely dark, I would escape to these games. Why do you have them hanging on your wall, Tim? I know you're in the programming business. Do you work for the people who make these games? Open Puzzle Build and look at the bottom right of the loading screen, I asked her back, noting the name of the game she was talking to me about. She looked over and her eyes widened. Other Gaming? Is that you? I nodded. I created Other Gaming many years ago, and all of these games are my creation. So you develop them? You own the company? These games? She asked. Her eyes widened, a note of disbelief in her tone. I grinned. Since I was 19. So when you told me Bridget was a gold digger, she asked. I laughed again. Yeah, I'm worth a little more than most, but honestly, most of that fortune is business related. Okay, she said, her face getting a little drained. I just came to tell you that dinner is ready. Dinner was great. Maddie and Shauna let Lily in, and she took advantage of my kitchen and made an amazing fettuccine carbonara, grilled garlic bread, and topped it all off with vanilla bean ice cream. By the time we got to the end of the meal, everyone was stuffed to the brim. Shauna kept her eyes on Lily. but Lily was surprisingly subdued despite the trite praise that Shauna, Maddie, and I gave. Afterward, Shauna went with Maddie to help her get ready for bed, while simultaneously hinting for me to talk to Lily. I poured us both a small glass of a lovely local desert wine. It was sweet, and its flavor softened on the tongue, like the perfect accompaniment after ice cream. Lily and I went and sat down in the living room. "You're all right, Lily. It was an amazing dinner, but if I may say, you didn't enjoy it very much." "Did we do something to offend you?" I asked. "No," Lily replied immediately. "No, it was, I mean—" She sighed and sank down on the couch, deflating a little. "Tim," Lily said quietly, a note of resignation in her voice. "Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you think you can finally rise? Above all this shit, that you can finally find something worth holding on to? But then in one moment of clarity, you realize that it's never going to happen, that the chasm is too wide to bridge?" I studied Lily for a while, not quite sure what she was talking about, but I figured it had something to do with our serious conversations about her past. I sipped my wine. I guess in some ways my breakup with Bridget was like that. I really loved her, and when I found out the truth, it broke something inside me, something that still feels empty. But I can't figure out how to fix it, but I know I have to do it. It's my ravine I'm trying to cross. "Does that count?" I asked. Lily nodded. "I guess in a way it does," and looked at me. "Tim, you're my ravine." I laughed. Not the best reaction judging by her counterlook. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. How can I be a gulf for you? A gap?" "Tim, I think we both know there's something between us. I mean that kiss." Lily smiled and blushed slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I smiled as well. "That was amazing," I admitted. She glowed for a moment, but then she was at a loss for words and sank into despair. "All last week we've been socializing. I've gotten to know Shauna and Maddie. I've had Rick looking out for me. I gotta know you, the man who caused the kids at his birthday party to push me into the pool just because I wanted to smoke." She smiled, and so did I. "But tonight in your office, I saw that you're a chasm I can't bridge. I can't be the one," she said. "Be what?" I asked in confusion. "Tim, I'm a nobody. I work as an administrator for the local council. I'm from nowhere, and I can't compare to the social circles you walk in." Lily looked at me. There were tears in her eyes, it looked like. Her heart was breaking. "I make just under 60,000 a year. I'm broke, and I can't. I mean, I won't be a gold digger." Lily was on the verge of bursting into tears. "Sometimes I can be just plain fat." This woman was pouring her heart out, feeling that with my money, I would consider her a gold digger, just like Bridget. She had lost a child and was angry, but for some reason, before she even knew anything, she opened up to me. I suddenly realized what I had to do. "Lily, come with me." I stood up, took her hand, and led her out the back door. We walked hand in hand, and I could feel the hope emanating from her fingers tight around mine as we walked down the path to the backyard. There were no lights on, but the moon was full as we began to stroll by the pool. Suddenly, without warning, I picked her up in my arms, pulled her tightly against me, and jumped in, both of us fully clothed in the pool. As we submerged under the water, I let her go and we both surfaced. I started laughing and Lily hissed, just like she had the week before. "Lily, I don't care about your past. I don't care that you're broken. You're not nothing to me. You're beautiful, talented. You cared enough about yourself tonight to make an amazing dinner. And before you walked into my office, I assume Shauna and my daughter saw that you liked me and encouraged you to chase after me, right?" She nodded. "Lily, if Shauna or Maddie thought you were, as you say, a gold digger, you wouldn't have come anywhere near me tonight, let alone had a chance to talk to me this week. Trust me, they don't think you're anything. If you let me, I'd be more than happy to date you, and we'll see where this goes." Lily kissed me again. "Okay, Mr. Other, but only if you promise to stop throwing me into pools anytime you decide you need my attention." I laughed. "Sorry, but that's not a deal." I gulped and Lily laughed. But before we could say anything else, there was the sound of the door opening. If you need them, I'll leave some towels here. Maddie's already in bed and will be turning out the lights soon. She'll leave you two alone and I'll go home, Shauna told us with an obvious smile as she placed the towels on the table. She then walked over to the edge and sat down on the chaise lounge. Smiling, Lily put her arms around my neck. I love him, Lily, Shauna said to Lily, looking at her with a strained look. I love him like the brother I never had, and there's no one more important to me in the world than the man you're holding in your arms right now. So I'm going to tell you this once and only once. Treat him right and never take advantage of him. He deserves to be loved, loved for what a wonderful man he is. He will always have Maddie, Rick, and me. But he needs a partner. He needs to be able to give his soul to someone who will treat it with care and give it the respect it deserves. I think you can be that person, Lily. But if you hurt him, I will do everything I can to protect him, even against you. Bridget is only now beginning to realize this. Treat Tim right, and you'll never have to worry. With those words, Shauna stood up and walked away. Stopping half a dozen paces from the back door, she looked back at us with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Lily, watch out for Tim. He's good. Even better than Rick, she smiled, and I blushed. Good night. We're going out for dinner tomorrow night. I'll see you then. Lily looked at me, pulling me close as Shauna headed inside. What did she mean by that? Shauna is very defensive when it comes to those she cares about, I told Lily, as we continued to float in the pool hugging each other. She never really loved Bridget, but she put up with her for me. If she did something, I'm sure we'll find out about it. I looked at Lily in the moonlight. But you just got her blessing to pursue me, trust me. I've seen plenty of women try that in the last year and they never even get a date. Maddie and Shauna seem to be able to figure it out. With those words, I pulled Lily out of the pool and we wrapped ourselves in towels and stopped to pick up our soaked clothes. We threw them in the laundry room and I led Lily by the hand to my room. As we passed Maddie's room and closed her door, I heard, "Good night, Daddy. Good night, Lily," in a cheerful tone. I laughed and said good night to her. Lily mumbled the same, clearly embarrassed. The next month was magical. Lily actually moved in with us overnight. It was a bit of a whirlwind, and we were constantly going out on dates, spending time outside. More than once, we both woke up late, and Nadine scolded me for missing our morning hangouts. I think she knew something, though, because a smile always appeared on her face when I was reprimanded. Lily, for her part, applied for and got a position on the local council, doing administrative work as she had done in Kingscliff. Her fear of not fitting into our social circles proved unfounded, as being a geek, I tried to stay as far away from glamour and glitz as possible. The first time I had to go on a trip, just one night in Sydney, Lily almost panicked. It had been months since that first night at the pool, and Lily was starting to worry if I wasn't in bed by midnight, which, being a geek, happened often. Traveling and not being in our bed brought back memories of loneliness. Eventually, I arranged a day off with her and took her with me to Sydney. I held my meetings, and she did a wonderful job of charming one of the board members into becoming my girlfriend. Around the third month, we exchanged an "I love you" after she pushed me into the pool before dinner. Being in the pool became a common theme in our relationship. A year later, I proposed, and I don't think I've ever seen Maddie and Shauna so happy. Our wedding took place on a Saturday afternoon in our backyard. Rick was my best man. Shauna was my maid of honor. When we said "I do" and our party said "you can kiss the bride," the photographer was ready when Rick and Shauna turned to us and pushed us both, you guessed it, into the pool. The pictures turned out beautifully, the smiles on our faces captured as we fell into the water hand in hand. Our honeymoon was in Europe, and we spent almost a month sightseeing and visiting almost every country. Lily and I found that we were very well suited for each other. Yes, we fought sometimes. But after the emotions were vented, we talked things out. I found that she was insanely jealous of me, and the only women who could talk to me without triggering her anger were Shauna, Maddie, and Nadine. Any other would find themselves facing the fiery red-haired woman in a matter of seconds. If I had worried after 2 previous marriages that fidelity would ever become an issue, 2 events that occurred on our first wedding anniversary put that issue to rest. The first occurred on one of the rare evenings when Shauna and Lily had a bachelorette party. They went with several women, some married and some single, to a local club. All the women danced together, and although the single women often accepted dance invitations from single guys, neither Shauna nor Lily would dance with any men. Shauna informed me of this 2 nights after it all happened. "Seriously, Tim, you can't blame Lily. It's not her fault," she told me. Lily was on the phone with our lawyer. I went to the restroom for a few minutes, and immediately, security told me these 2 guys started hitting on her. When they didn't take no for an answer, one of them tried to escort her out of the bar in front of the 2 ladies still sitting with her at the table. The second guy grabbed Lily, she elbowed him in the stomach, and when he fell, used her purse to hit him in the head, screaming over and over again that she was a married woman and her body belonged only to her husband. They can both get the hell out and burn in hell. And things like that, Shauna told me with a grimace of amusement on her face. When the club's CCTV footage was shown in court, the charges fell flat, and the judge sentenced the 2 boys to 6 months probation with a warning to make them realize that no means no. And the second incident happened about a month after our first wedding anniversary. We spent it camping on Fraser Island in Queensland, relaxing on the beach. After that week, I realized why the locals use the term white pointers, as Lily almost never wore a tank top when we played in the surf. Anyway, I digress. The second incident happened about a month after that. Lily went to visit Bridget. It took about 60 seconds before Lily realized something was wrong. I had never shown Lily a picture of Bridget or described her. But she did tell me about an encounter she'd had that day when we were lounging at the pool. Rick and Shauna were sitting on the other side of us, and Maddie and Greg were swimming back and forth, playing with some toys in the pool. I wasn't expecting this. I just had an appointment with someone named B. Brown. When she walked in and sat down, I greeted her politely, but she just stared at me, Lily innocently recounted. I felt very uncomfortable when she looked at me, but despite her reputation as a bitch, Bridget didn't disappoint. My wife continued to recount her encounter with my ex-wife. Now I see why he likes you. You look much better than he described, the woman told Lily. Lily blushed, thinking she was addressing me. Thank you, Miss Brown. I like to think that my husband Tim finds me attractive, Lily replied. At that, the woman in front of her frowned, then smiled, but it wasn't a very pleasant smile. Oh, I didn't mean Tim, I meant Aaron, the woman said. Lily gasped. Whoa, what? Why did you mention Aaron? How do you know him? Asked Lily, now concerned about who this woman was. A sly smile blossomed on the woman's face. Aaron and I know a lot about you. We've been following you for a while. After he got out of prison, I tracked him down to take you back, the woman said to my wife with a sly smile. Lily shuddered. Aaron was a part of her past that she still had a hard time coming to terms with. Why would you do that? I'm married now, my wife said, starting to blush. Oh, I know. Little Miss Pretty red-headed bitch, but you're in my shoes, the woman growled, losing any hint of politeness. In your place, said Lily, still a little shocked. The woman stood up. Yes, my place. I was Mrs. Other before you and I want my husband back. Lily switched from panic to anger. The realization of this fact focused her. Suddenly, Lily wasn't worried about Aaron, but about the woman who had caused her husband so much grief. Bridget, she said simply. Bridget nodded. I'm a bitch. Tim is my husband, sure. I screwed up the first time, but I'll get him back. He loved that body. My tits are much bigger than yours, and I don't have the headaches of losing a baby like you do. For a moment, Lily thought she was about to jump over the table and strangle Bridget. Apparently, Aaron had told her something, but my wife held back, but only just. Without saying anything, she got up from the table, grabbed her bag, and started to leave. However, Bridget had other plans. As Lily was walking out the door, Bridget grabbed Lily by the hair. Bitch! I'm not done with you yet! Bridget started yelling in front of everyone in the cafe, dragging Lily back to her table. You're going to dump Tim and go back to Aaron, and I'm going to get back together with Tim and have his babies, and then Tim and all his money will always be mine. Bridget grabbed Lily's arm and spun her around to face her, but didn't notice as she threw a punch with her left. My beautiful red-headed wife took advantage of the moment to catch Bridget off guard, and her closed fist landed in the other woman's face. The blow stunned Bridget, and she let go of Lily's hair. Lily quickly followed, reached out, tripped Bridget, and felled her to the ground face down, putting one of her hands behind her back. Someone call the police, Lily said to the witnesses in the cafe, and one of them replied that he already had. My wife then recounted how she had come up close to Bridget, almost in a whisper, holding Bridget face down, clasping her hand, and Lily's knee was now in the center of her back. Listen to me, slut. You had your chance, this man can't be poached. You should know that Shauna will make sure your body is never found if you try to do that. Bridget resisted, but sank to the ground at the mention of Shauna. And you know, I have no problem helping her dig a hole. But he owns me, Bridget, not the other way around. And as for the kids, don't worry, I was going to tell him tonight, but I guess you'll be the first to know, and Tim will be a father again. The doctors confirmed this morning that I'm pregnant. Bridget groaned. And knowing how good Tim is at injecting that lovely baby dough into me, I wouldn't be surprised if it was twins. The police showed up after that, and very quickly Bridget was arrested. Lily was questioned. But everyone noted that Lily had only acted in self-defense and restrained Bridget. After finishing her story, Lily told me that she regretted telling Bridget before she told me she was pregnant. I laughed and told her that it was okay, that Bridget could get hurt because of it, and that I was glad my wife and pregnant children were okay. And Bridget was released the next day and served with a restraining order against Lily, Maddie, Shauna, Rick, and Greg, and of course me. We never saw her again, but a few years later we learned that she had married some drug lord on the Gold Coast. It wasn't long before she was arrested, and her husband and a few others got jail time. We also learned that Lily was carrying not twins, but triplets. It was 3 o'clock Wednesday morning when Lily went into labor. Connor, Adam, and their sister Jessie were born via C-section not 2 hours later. The doctors didn't want to risk triplets and complications. I was by Lily's side the whole time, on the other side of the curtain in the operating room. My wife was brave, and I loved her even more for it. I took a 3-month vacation from other games to help her, along with a full-time nanny, Maddie's curious older sister, and of course Shauna, Rick, and even little Greg, who wasn't so little anymore. I did the diaper business. I'd forgotten how bad those early diapers were, and if you multiply that by 3, the house smelled a little weird for a few more years. But as with all things, we got on with life, and Lily and I had a few fights when we were exhausted. I think I just walked away one day, going to Shauna and Rick's house before I calmed down. Now the triplets are 3 years old, and we spend our typical Saturday afternoon by the pool at our house. 15 minutes ago, I threw Lily into the pool for dropping a crude joke about how William Riker in Star Trek hits on all the women, so I should be more like Riker and hit on her more often. I did just that and dropped her in the pool. She responded by grabbing me with a big smile and pulling me with her where we laughed and kissed. The kids thought it was great, and within minutes the whole family was in the pool. A few minutes later, Lily and I climbed out and sat down with Shauna and Rick. Shauna was still my best friend, and I couldn't have done it all without her. A couple years later, Lily and I sat down and talked with Shauna and Rick about Lily's past. Rick didn't know everything, and it made the four of us even closer. So on a lazy Saturday afternoon, Shauna pulled out a deck of cards while the kids played. The adults got down to serious business. "She's cheating on you," Shauna said, leaning over and whispering in my ear as the two of us watched Lily from across the table. For a moment, I almost panicked. The last time Shauna had said those words, my world had nearly collapsed. But this time I smiled. "I know," I whispered back, and Lily smiled back at me. I looked back over my shoulder at the large mirrored doors reflecting the view of the cards I held in my hand. The angle was perfect, so my wife could see what I had in my hand. He knows what's good for him, Shauna, Lily said with a smirk, laying down the next cards. He knows that if I win now, he'll win later, she said, casting a knowing look at me. And to answer the question, yes, I did win later, and twice at that, but that's a story for another time. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.